Officer Noah Briggs was sent to Clearwater after the flood to lead rescue patrols through what was left of the drowned town. He thought it would be another night of duty, water, debris, and silence. But his German shepherd, Rex, had other plans. As the rain eased, Rex stopped on the bridge and began to bark into the dark water. There, tangled in a branch, floated a small baby blanket. At first glance, it looked like storm debris, but Noah saw what others might miss. The fabric wasn't torn by water. It had been cut clean, deliberate. It wasn't trash. It was a message. And when the town's preacher warned him to let the river keep its secrets, Noah realized he hadn't just found a child. He'd uncovered a truth Clearwater was willing to drown to forget. Please support us by subscribing to the channel to follow this emotional journey. The rain over Clearwater came down in sheets, relentless and cold, turning streets into rivers and homes into islands. The storm had stripped the town of color. Everything was gray and trembling under the weight of water. Street lamps flickered through veils of mist, throwing pale halos over telephone wires that sagged like exhausted arms. What was once a quiet riverside town now looked like the aftermath of a slow disaster, one that refused to finish dying. Sergeant Noah Briggs, 42, guided his police SUV carefully through the knee-deep current, the tires hissing through dark water that hid the broken pavement beneath. The wipers fought to keep the windshield clear, but the rain kept returning, endless, thick and whispering like static. Noah was a man shaped by storms, both the kind that came from the sky and the kind that came from memory. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the deliberate movements of someone who never rushed but never hesitated. His hair was cropped short and dark, dusted with gray at the temples. A small scar cut through his beard along his left jaw, a pale reminder of his years as a military police officer before the badge. His eyes, cold gray under heavy brows, were the eyes of someone who had seen enough loss to measure every sound for danger. He didn't talk much, not because he didn't care, but because he had learned that silence listened better than people did. On the passenger seat sat Rex, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of burnished bronze and black. His left ear bent slightly from an old injury, and silver threaded through his muzzle like winter through an old forest. Rex had been with Noah since the K-9's deployment after a flood rescue years ago. His discipline was absolute, his presence steady. Where Noah went, Rex followed, a shadow with a heartbeat. The partnership was quiet, unspoken, but complete. Noah adjusted the radio. "Unit 3 to dispatch," he said evenly. "Harbor Road still holding, moving toward the bridge." The reply crackled back, barely audible through the storm. "Copy, Unit 3. Watch for structural damage. Peak surge expected in 10 minutes. "Copy," he said, dropping the mic back to the hook. His breath fogged faintly in the cold air. The SUV rolled forward, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the rain. On his right, the bait shop was half underwater, its faded Live Minnows sign swaying in the wind. On the left, the town diner's neon sign still blinked defiantly. Open, though no soul remained inside. Rex shifted, muscles tightening beneath his wet coat. Noah glanced at him. "You smell something?" The dog didn't move except for a slow, focused lift of his head, ears pricking forward. Then came a low rumble from deep in his chest, a growl born of instinct, not aggression. His gaze fixed toward the outline of the old truss bridge ahead. The bridge had been a landmark once, painted red and strong. But now it stood, half submerged, its skeletal frame glistening under the floodlights like the ribs of a drowned beast. Police tape fluttered uselessly in the wind. "All right," Noah muttered. He parked the cruiser near the bridgehead, killed the siren, and stepped out into the torrent. The rain hit him like gravel. His boots sank into cold water that surged past his calves. The air smelled of iron and rot. He turned his flashlight toward the bridge. "Stay," he ordered out of habit, but the soft jingle of Rex's tags followed him anyway. The shepherd was already ahead, moving with certainty toward the second span. The flood raged below, swollen and fast, carrying branches, bits of fencing, and the broken remains of Clearwater's lives. Noah's light swept over the current, then stopped. There, caught against the lower girders, something pale was tangled among the debris. It rocked with the motion of the river, stubborn and heavy. A blanket, maybe, or a jacket. But even from here, he could see that the fabric edge wasn't shredded. It was a straight cut, clean as a blade's whisper. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding. Noah's chest tightened. He clipped his safety line to the railing and crawled forward onto the slick steel grate, lying flat so the wind couldn't take him. The rain ran off his back in rivers. He waited for the surge to ease, then reached down into the freezing current. His arm vanished to the shoulder. The water tried to drag him in, tugging with raw strength, but he caught the edge of the fabric and hauled upward. The bundle hit the grate with a sodden thud. He rolled it carefully, fingers numb. Inside the first layer of soaked fleece was a smaller one, thicker, wrapped tight. When he peeled it back, the light caught a flash of skin. Bluish, fragile, impossibly small. A baby. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the drum of rain. The infant's chest moved weakly, lips dark and trembling. A faint noise, half a gasp, half a whimper, escaped. Not a cry, just the idea of one. "Oh God," Noah whispered. Training took command of his body. He shrugged out of his wet jacket and tucked the infant against his chest, skin to skin, wrapping both in the emergency foil from his belt. The cold bit through him instantly, but he didn't care. "Dispatch, Unit 3, he said, voice level despite the tremor in his hands. "Infant recovered at Harbor Bridge. Severe hypothermia, weak respiration. Request EMS Priority 1. Static crackled back. "Copy, Unit 3. ETA 7 minutes. Hold position." Rex leaned close, nose brushing the foil bundle, one paw pressed lightly against Noah's arm, as if steadying him. The baby's chest fluttered again, then stopped. Noah didn't think. He acted. He tilted the tiny head, cleared the airway, and gave 2 feather-light breaths. "Come on," he murmured. "Stay with me." A cough, faint but real, answered him. He rubbed the small sternum in slow circles, feeling the fragile heartbeat stir. Color began to creep back, a pale flush spreading through the blue. "That's it. Keep fighting," he said under his breath. Headlights flared at the far end of the bridge. A pickup truck skidded to a stop, the driver leaning out. "You need help?" "Road's closed," Noah shouted, not daring to look away from the baby. "Turn around." The man hesitated, then obeyed. A minute later, the storm swallowed the truck's taillights. Time thinned to the rhythm of breathing. 5 seconds. 10. Another weak cry. Noah exhaled shakily, pressing the baby closer. The warmth of his own chest was the only thing between life and loss. Sirens began to rise in the distance, a thin metallic wail threading through the rain. 2 EMTs appeared out of the downpour, pushing a gurney through knee-high water. The younger one, a woman with freckles and sharp, no-nonsense eyes, knelt beside him. "We've got heat packs and O2. Good work, Sergeant." "Rex found her," Noah said. The older medic opened the pediatric kit, hands sure despite the cold. They worked quickly, oxygen mask in place, foil sealed tight around the infant. The baby's cry grew stronger, thin, reedy, beautiful. The sound made Noah's shoulders sag with relief. "Stable enough to move," the medic said. "We're taking her to Clearwater General." "I'll escort," Noah replied, rising to his feet. His legs ached from the cold, but the adrenaline drowned the pain. As the EMTs carried the child away, Rex followed until the gurney disappeared into the flashing lights. Noah bent to pick up the soaked blanket left behind. The edge gleamed under his flashlight. Clean cut, not torn. Someone had sliced it deliberately. Someone had meant for this to happen. He didn't know if that meant mercy or malice. He only knew it meant something. The ambulance roared off, its lights painting the flooded streets in red and blue. The river kept whispering beneath the bridge, a voice that never slept. Noah looked down once more at the water, then at Rex, who stood motionless beside him, waiting for orders. "Good work, partner," he said quietly. The dog pressed his flank to Noah's leg, steady and warm. Together they turned back toward the cruiser, boots sloshing through black water, the storm still raging overhead. Somewhere beyond the rain, a baby's heartbeat continued, and for that night it was enough. The old church on Clearwater Hill loomed against the dark horizon, its steeple cracked and gleaming wet beneath the floodlights, as if heaven itself had been nailed down to keep it from drifting away. The storm had turned the once sacred grounds into a lake of brown water, and the front doors, carved oak warped from years of humidity, had been forced open to serve as the town's makeshift medical post. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, candle wax, and the faint sweetness of wet wood. Sergeant Noah Briggs entered with the baby in his arms, wrapped in the foil blanket that reflected the trembling lamplight. His uniform clung to him, soaked through, the badge on his chest dulled by grime and rain. Behind him, Rex followed closely, fur dripping, the great German shepherd's breath visible in the cold air, eyes darting over the chaos. The pews had been pushed aside to make room for cots and medical supplies. Lanterns hung from IV stands, throwing golden halos onto the rough plaster walls. Volunteers moved with the quiet rhythm of exhaustion. Firefighters still in their jackets, an old paramedic rolling bandages, a priest moving between the beds, whispering more comfort than scripture. And in the center of it all was Elena Ward. She was 33, tall and slender in the way of people who have forgotten what rest feels like. Her hair, chestnut brown, was tied back in a careless knot, with a few damp strands clinging to her temples. The sharp planes of her face were softened by fatigue, and her skin carried the pale undertone of sleeplessness. But her eyes, hazel green, steady and bright, cut through the flicker of the storm like glass catching light. She wore a navy windbreaker over hospital scrubs, and though the hem of her sleeves was soaked, her hands were clean, precise, and calm. Elena had been a nurse since her early 20s, widowed young after her husband, a firefighter, was killed during a bridge collapse in Baton Rouge. She carried that grief like a compass, always pointing her toward the next soul to save. When Noah came through the door, she didn't ask who he was. The soldier's bearing, the wet infant in his arms, and the dog at his heel were explanation enough. "Over here," she said, her voice low but firm, clearing space on a folding table. "How long was she exposed?" "Don't know," Noah said. "Found her under the harbor bridge, cold but breathing." Elena reached out, and he passed the small, silent bundle into her waiting arms. The nurse's hands moved quickly, checking pulse, color, airway. "Cords cut with something dull," she murmured. "Not surgical. Maybe household scissors." She brushed back the fleece and found a small scrap of cloth tied loosely around the infant's neck, embroidered with a single pale letter. L. Elena paused, thumb tracing the stitch. "She had someone who cared enough to mark her," she whispered. Rex gave a low sound, half whine, half growl, and sank down beside the table. "He's fine," Noah said. "He's just watching." "Let him," Elena replied without looking up. "Dogs don't lie about danger." She turned to a young paramedic, a girl with sandy hair and a nervous expression. "Molly, warm saline incubator blanket, oxygen flow 2 liters per minute." Molly nodded and rushed off, shoes slapping wet tile. Elena adjusted the infant's position, laid 2 heated packs at her sides, then bent close to listen. "Weak but steady," she said. "She's a fighter." The baby gave a thin, rasping cry that filled the church with a sound older than language. The volunteers looked up, pausing mid-task. It wasn't loud, but it cut through fatigue like sunlight through cloud. Elena smiled faintly. "That's it, sweetheart. You tell the storm you're still here." Noah exhaled, his shoulders easing. "Good lungs." "Good omen," Elena corrected softly. She caught him watching her and tilted her head. "You've been out there long?" "Since yesterday morning," he admitted. "We're down 3 units and half the grid." "Then sit," she said simply. "You look like a man the flood would spit back out of pity." He gave the ghost of a smile, but stayed standing, eyes drifting to Rex, who had lain down beside the cot, head resting near the baby's feet. His fur gleamed gold where the lamplight hit, and his ears twitched with every shift of air. "He's been in worse," Noah said quietly. "You both have," Elena replied, without lifting her gaze from her patient. The baby's breathing steadied. Her color deepened from gray-blue to faint rose. Elena lifted her pen, scribbling on a damp clipboard, then spoke without looking up. "She needs a name. We can't keep calling her the infant." "You'll give her one?" Noah asked. "Someone should," she said, running her finger along the tiny embroidered L. Maybe Lumen. It means light. Seems right, doesn't it?" Noah repeated the word softly. "Lumen." It rolled heavy and new in his mouth. "You naming her after Latin class?" "After hope," she said, "and maybe habit." The storm rattled the stained glass windows. One of the candles flickered and went out, plunging half the room into shadow. Noah relit it with his lighter, the small flame trembling like a living thing. Elena's eyes followed the motion, resting on his scarred hands, the steady way he moved even when the world shook. "You've done this before," she said. "Rescues?" he asked. "Pulling life out of water." He looked at the baby, then at her. "Once or twice." "Did they make it?" "Not all," he said quietly. She nodded as though she understood, and perhaps she did. "Then this one's for all the rest." The wind rose again, a mournful howl threading through the broken panes high above. Somewhere in the rafters, water dripped into a metal basin with the slow precision of a metronome. The church itself seemed to breathe with them, holding its own kind of vigil. Elena adjusted the heat pack, tucking the foil tighter around Lumen's tiny form. The baby sighed and turned her head toward the warmth. Rex shifted closer, resting his chin near the cot's edge. His dark eyes caught the candlelight, soft and unwavering. "He's protective," Elena said. "He's loyal," Noah replied. "Sometimes those two get confused." "They shouldn't," she said, almost to herself. She straightened, rolling her sore shoulders, and glanced toward the logbook at the edge of the table. Her handwriting, neat even under fatigue, filled the latest line. Patient, female, estimated 2 days old. Found by Officer Noah Briggs and K9 Rex. Temporary name, Lumen Ward. The surname slipped out of her instinctively, unclaimed but not unwelcome. She smiled faintly. She needed a last name, she said when Noah noticed. For paperwork. And for belonging, he said. Elena met his eyes then, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to quiet. Between them, the baby breathed softly, the steady pulse of a world beginning again. The wind beat at the walls, but inside, beneath the failing lamps and the smell of rain and iron, there was warmth. Thin but real, the kind that clings even when everything else is lost. By dawn, the storm had fallen silent, leaving Clearwater wrapped in a ghostly hush. The river had receded just enough to reveal what it had taken and what it had left behind. Streets once swallowed by water now glistened under a thin veil of mist. The air smelled of wet earth, diesel, and the faint bitterness of something rotten pulled from the depths. Sergeant Noah Briggs stood at the base of the harbor bridge, boots sinking into the soft mud, while Rex paced beside him, nose low, tail stiff with intent. The German shepherd's fur was still damp from the night before, and streaks of dried river silt clung to his legs like battle paint. His breath came in short bursts, nostrils twitching as he traced invisible paths in the morning air. Noah crouched, running a gloved hand along the edge of the truss beam, where he'd pulled the infant hours earlier. The metal was cold and scored with faint scratches, as though someone had clawed at it before the water came. The thought tightened his chest. He straightened and scanned the riverbank. The flood had left a mosaic of debris, branches, torn tarps, a child's rubber ball, and among them, a single muddy shoe. Rex found it first. He gave a short bark and pawed at the ground, nose buried in a patch of reeds near the slope. Noah knelt beside him, prying the object free. It was a woman's sneaker, white once, now streaked brown with silt, the heel ripped clean off as if torn in struggle. Inside, bits of dried grass and threadbare fabric told their own story. Someone had run hard and far before the river found her. Noah bagged the shoe carefully, labeling it by habit. "Good boy," he murmured. Rex wagged his tail once, distracted by a new scent drifting across the mud. He trotted forward, stopping near the twisted remains of the guardrail. There, half buried under a sheet of newspaper and river muck, was an envelope, its paper waterlogged, the ink bleeding outward like veins. Noah peeled it open carefully, his fingers slick with mud. Inside was a single torn note scrawled in hurried, trembling handwriting. "I didn't want to, but he said I must." The rest of the message had dissolved into nothing. He stood for a long moment, the words heavy in his gloved hand. The sentence wasn't a confession. It was a cry, the last whisper of someone cornered. He glanced toward the horizon where the town rose in broken silhouettes. The morning sun was weak, its light strained through fog that still clung to rooftops like smoke. He felt the echo of instinct, that deep, muscle-born voice every cop learns to trust before reason can catch up. Something about this didn't fit. Babies weren't abandoned with precision-cut blankets and buried notes. "Noah," called a voice behind him. It belonged to Deputy Frank Miller, his partner for 7 years, a man built like an oak that had been struck by lightning and kept standing anyway. Frank was in his late 40s, thick-necked, with a square face weathered into permanent skepticism. His short-cropped blonde hair was streaked with gray, and the lines around his mouth suggested a man who rarely smiled without effort. A faded tattoo of a marine anchor peeked from under his sleeve. "Dispatch says hospital's got the baby stable," Frank said, trudging down the embankment. "You look like hell." "Long night," Noah replied. Frank squinted at the envelope in Noah's hand. "What's that?" "Found near the bridge, might be connected." Frank leaned closer, reading the blurred line. His jaw tightened. "Could be nothing. Flood carries trash from miles away." "Could be everything," Noah countered. He nodded toward Rex, who was now circling the slope, tail sweeping the mist. He's got something. The shepherd had locked onto a faint trail, a series of shallow prints half-washed by the current but distinct enough for trained eyes. Bare footprints, small, light, moving from the bridge embankment toward the road. Rex followed them with methodical precision, snout low, until the trail veered up toward the higher ground beyond the bridge. The tracks grew faint, then vanished into the mud line near a cluster of derelict shipping containers, half sunk and rusted orange. Frank cursed softly. That old site again? I thought they sealed it off years ago. They did, Noah said, after the childcare scandal. The containers stood at the edge of an overgrown lot, surrounded by bent fencing and the skeletal remains of a playground. 2 swings still hung, one seat missing, the other twisting slowly in the wind. Faded murals of cartoon animals still clung to the walls, colors long since drained to gray. Noah had been there once before, back when the town shut the illegal orphanage down after reports of neglect. The owner, a woman named Patricia Crane, had vanished before sentencing. Some said she fled south. Others said the river had claimed her. Noah had never believed either version. Rex sniffed the ground near the first container, pawing at the door seam. His growl was low, restrained but certain. Noah shone his flashlight through the crack. Inside, the beam caught the edge of an overturned cot, a child's shoe, and the black trace of smoke curling up one wall. "Someone's been here recently," he said. Frank frowned. "Homeless squatters, maybe, or scavengers." "Scavengers don't burn blankets," Noah said, "and they don't leave babies floating downstream with handwritten notes." He crouched, pressing a finger into the wet earth. The indentation of another footprint lay just beyond the container's corner. Larger this time, boot-shaped, heavy, fresh enough that water hadn't filled it. Frank's tone hardened. "You're thinking someone forced her, whoever she is, to abandon the kid." "I'm thinking someone wanted that baby gone," Noah replied, "but not dead. There's a difference." The deputy adjusted his cap, exhaling through his nose. "You planning to tell Chief Turner that, or should I?" "I'll file the report," Noah said. "Keep the envelope between us for now." Frank gave him a look, half caution, half trust. "You always were a stubborn bastard." "Experience," Noah said dryly, "not habit." They walked the perimeter in silence, the wind tugging at their jackets, the mud sucking at their boots. A flock of blackbirds burst from a nearby power line, rising into the pale sky like scattered ash. Rex paused, ears twitching toward the sound, then returned to Noah's side, sitting square and watchful. The morning light had grown stronger now, gleaming off puddles where the flood had retreated. From up here, the river looked deceptively calm, its surface smooth, concealing whatever secrets it had carried in the night. Noah pocketed the bagged note and took one last look at the containers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Frank followed his gaze. "It never is it?" Noah didn't answer. He reached down to pat Rex's head, the shepherd pressing against his leg in silent agreement. The sun slipped higher over Clearwater, revealing more wreckage, fallen fences, drowned toys, tire tracks leading nowhere. But among it all, there was the faint sound of church bells from the hill, still ringing, steady and stubborn, announcing a morning the town hadn't earned but was given anyway. Noah turned toward the sound, knowing the baby, Lumen, was safe there for now. But the words on that letter still burned through his mind. "I didn't want to." But he said I must. He had seen guilt before. This wasn't guilt. This was fear. And fear always left a trail. The morning haze clung to Clearwater like breath on glass when Sergeant Noah Briggs returned to the fenced-off orphanage grounds. The flood had left scars everywhere. Mud caked along the fences, trash tangled in branches, and the faint metallic tang of water that had gone stale overnight. The "No Trespassing" sign on the gate swayed in the wind, its rusted hinges complaining softly. Beyond it, the old St. Mercy's Home for Children rose from the fog, its wooden boards gray and flaking, its bell tower leaning like a weary sentinel. Noah moved quietly, the weight of the last night still pressing on his shoulders. Beside him, Rex padded through the wet soil, nose twitching as he caught the scent of something old and unsettled. The dog's black and tan fur was still damp from the rain, his muscles taut, his posture low but alert. Noah paused at the cut section of fence, crouching to examine it. The edges were freshly sliced, gleaming silver against rust. Someone had entered this place recently. He ducked under the gap, his boots sinking slightly in the soft ground, while Rex slipped through after him. The air inside the yard was still, unnaturally so, as though the world itself was holding its breath. A child's tricycle, missing a wheel, leaned against a wall streaked with mildew. Pieces of a wooden swing lay scattered under a tree, the ropes long rotted away. Noah swept his flashlight over the ground. Boot prints, faint but new, pressed into the drying mud. One foot dragged slightly, the right heel deeper than the left. Whoever had come here, they had a limp. He followed the trail toward the back of the church where the main structure sagged into the earth. The broken windows were boarded with mismatched planks, but behind one, a thin seam of light flickered. Candlelight. Noah reached for his holster, instincts tightening. Then a voice came from behind the broken columns, low and even. "Careful where you step, officer. This ground remembers its dead." Noah turned sharply. A man stood half-shrouded by the mist, tall and lean, dressed in a black cassock under a heavy coat. His silver hair was neatly combed back, his posture upright, his hands folded before him like a priest caught mid-sermon. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, and his eyes, icy blue-gray, carried a disconcerting calm, sharp enough to be mistaken for kindness. "Didn't know anyone was still living out here?" Noah said, voice steady. The man smiled faintly. "Living is generous. I watch over what remains. I'm Reverend Caleb Dunn." The name sat in the air like a coin dropped in water, quiet, deliberate, leaving ripples. "St. Mercy's was condemned 10 years ago," Noah said. "You got permission to be here?" Dunn's smile didn't fade, but his eyes thinned. "Permission?" "The city abandoned these children long before I arrived. Someone has to guard their memory." His voice was soft, melodic, practiced, the tone of a man who spent his life preaching to people who wanted to believe. Rex gave a low growl, breaking the strange stillness. His hackles rose as he stepped forward, placing himself between Dunn and Noah. The Reverend's mask faltered for an instant. His gaze flicked to the shepherd and back. "Fine animal," he said too quickly. "German shepherd, yes? I've heard they can sense evil." "Or fear," Noah replied, watching him closely. "You nervous, Reverend?" Dunn's smile faltered. "Only cautious. I've had visitors who came here not for salvation, but for ruin." His voice softened again, almost pitying. "But you're not one of those, are you, Sergeant?" The way he said "Sergeant" made Noah's spine tighten. He hadn't introduced himself. "You seem to know a lot," Noah said. "Old habits," Dunn replied smoothly. "I used to serve in another parish. I keep track of the souls in my care, even the ones who wander in wearing a badge." Noah shifted his light toward the side of the church. Through a crack in the boards, he caught the faint shimmer of metal, a heavy circular lock set into a trap door beneath the foundation. "What's down there?" he asked. Dunn's eyes darkened. the warmth in his tone vanishing. "Storage," he said curtly. "For what?" Noah pressed. Dunn stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was nearly a whisper. "For what must not be forgotten. The city buried its sins here, Sergeant. I simply make sure they stay buried." Rex barked sharply, the sudden sound echoing off the stone. Dunn flinched, just barely, but enough for Noah to see it. "You should keep your animal quiet," Dunn said tightly. "He doesn't understand reverence." "He understands lies," Noah said, unmoving, "and he's better at spotting them than I am." The Reverend's mouth twitched into something like a smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "Then perhaps he should preach the next sermon." Rain began again, soft but insistent, tapping on the corrugated tin roofs. Noah's radio crackled faintly at his side, but he didn't answer it. He stepped toward the hatch, testing the ground. Dunn's voice sharpened. "I wouldn't open that if I were you. There are things below that don't appreciate sunlight." "What things?" Noah asked. Dunn tilted his head slightly, the smile returning but empty now. "Memories," he said, "and ghosts of mercy." Rex gave another low growl, his body tense, muscles quivering under his soaked fur. Dunn's gaze flicked toward the dog again, and this time Noah noticed it. The faint twitch in the Reverend's left hand, the instinctive reach toward his pocket before stopping. Something about that motion felt wrong. Too quick, too guarded. Noah took a step back. "I'll need to come back with a warrant," he said flatly. "Until then, don't go anywhere." "Where would I go?" Dunn asked softly. "Everything I need is here. The past doesn't wander, Sergeant. It waits." Noah turned without replying, motioning for Rex to follow. The shepherd lingered a second longer, staring at the Reverend before obeying. Dunn watched them go, his figure framed in the church doorway, motionless, a black silhouette against the gray morning. By the time Noah reached the gate, his radio came alive again. Frank's voice buzzed through the static. "You at that orphanage still? Chief wants your report." "Tell him I found someone squatting there," Noah said. "Calls himself Reverend Caleb Dunn, claims he's watching over souls." "Creepy," Frank muttered. "You believe him?" "No," Noah said, "and neither does Rex." He glanced over his shoulder. The Reverend was gone, but the church door had been shut tight, a faint clanging echo marking the sound of a lock sliding home. The rain thickened, washing the footprints from the mud as Noah climbed into his cruiser. Rex sat beside him, head low, eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of the orphanage fading into mist. "Yeah," Noah murmured, starting the engine. "I don't like him either." The dog gave a single low growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air long after the cruiser pulled away. 3 nights after the encounter with Reverend Caleb Dunn, Clearwater had settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that hums before something breaks again. The storm had gone, but its ghost still haunted the town in puddles that refused to dry and air that smelled faintly of rust. Sergeant Noah Briggs hadn't slept properly since. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Reverend's pale stare and heard the hollow clang of the lock sliding into place beneath that ruined church. Rex slept lighter than usual, too, waking at every distant sound, the crash of loose shutters, the far-off cry of gulls, the wind dragging through the empty streets. That night, the radio on Noah's dashboard hissed with static and half-broken dispatch chatter. He sat parked near the harbor warehouse district, where the floodwater had left a crust of mud and garbage against every door. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness in rhythmic arcs, each pass revealing another scrap of ruin, collapsed crates, wet tarps, torn posters clinging to the walls like skin. It was past midnight when Rex suddenly lifted his head. The shepherd's body tensed, ears sharp, muscles coiled. Then came the low, deliberate growl, a warning, not of threat, but of discovery. "What is it, boy?" Noah murmured, already stepping out of the cruiser. The air outside was thick and damp. Rex trotted ahead, nose to the ground, leading him toward the narrow passage between two warehouses. The alley smelled of iron, mold, and something faintly human. Fear, maybe, or pain. Noah followed the sound of Rex's low whine to the far end, where a dim security light flickered over a stack of broken pallets. That was when he saw her. The girl was slumped against the brick wall, knees drawn to her chest, shivering beneath a torn gray blanket. She couldn't have been more than 18. Her face was thin and dirt-streaked, her lips cracked and pale. Under the weak light, Noah saw the trembling of her hands, both wrapped in strips of dirty gauze, one already soaked through with blood. Her hair was dark, shoulder-length, but unevenly cut, as if done with trembling hands and a dull blade. The bruises along her forearms told their own story. Restraints, perhaps, or something worse. Her skin was pale against the darkness, the color of someone who'd been kept away from sunlight far too long. Rex crouched low beside her, sniffing cautiously, tail held still. The girl flinched at first, but when the dog pressed his warm head gently against her knee, she exhaled shakily, the smallest sound of relief breaking through her lips. Noah knelt in front of her, his voice low, the tone he used for the broken and frightened. "Hey," he said softly. "You're safe now. What's your name?" The girl blinked, as if the question itself was foreign. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse and thin. Mara Lee." "All right, Mara," Noah said. "You hurt bad?" She looked down at her bandaged hands, flexing her fingers slowly. "He made me do it," she whispered. "Who?" Her eyes darted toward the mouth of the alley, then back at him. "The Reverend." The word came out like poison she was trying to spit out. Noah felt something cold settle under his ribs. "Caleb Dunn?" She nodded once, trembling. "He called it redemption. Said the Lord forgives only what's given back. I didn't understand, not until—" Her breath hitched, and she pressed her good hand to her stomach. "He said the baby wasn't supposed to live." Rex growled softly, the sound vibrating against Noah's arm. Noah's jaw clenched. "You were at his compound? St. Mercy's?" Her eyes filled with tears. "He calls it a rescue, a home for girls who've lost their way. We weren't allowed to leave, not until we paid our debt. He said we carried sin inside us, and it had to be removed." She shut her eyes, shaking. "I ran when I heard what happened to the last one." The words hit Noah like a hammer. His stomach twisted. He thought of the baby he'd pulled from the flood, the one Elena had named Lumen, and for the first time, the pieces began to align in a way that made his blood run cold. "Mara," he said carefully, "how long ago did you escape?" 3 days, she whispered. "The night the river came. I hid in the freight yard. I thought the flood would wash it all away, that maybe he'd stop looking. But I saw him, yesterday, watching from the bridge." Her breathing quickened. "He said I couldn't hide from God." Noah shook his head, his tone steady but burning underneath. "He's not God. He's a man, and men like that bleed when they fall." He reached for his radio. "We're getting you to the medical post, all right? My partner can—" "No," she gasped, eyes wide. "If he knows I talked, he'll come for me. He always comes." "Mara," he said firmly, but not unkindly, "he's not going to touch you again. I promise you that." He took off his jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders. She clutched it tightly, the oversized fabric swallowing her frame. Rex pressed closer, resting his head on her knee again. Something softened in her then. She reached out, fingers trembling, and brushed Rex's ear. "He saved me," she murmured, voice distant. Noah glanced at her, confused. "Who?" "The baby," she said faintly. "When the water came, I couldn't do it. I left her where he told me, near the bridge. I thought I'd killed her. But when I heard on the radio that someone found a baby that night, I prayed it was her. I prayed she made it." Noah's throat tightened. "She did," he said quietly. "She's alive. Safe. You saved her." Mara stared at him, disbelief and grief fighting for space in her eyes. "No. He said God wouldn't let her live." Noah met her gaze, firm but gentle. "Then God must have disagreed." Her lip trembled. A sob escaped her chest. Not loud, but deep, the kind that breaks something loose after too long being silent. Noah let her cry, glancing toward the end of the alley. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the sky again, low and uneasy. When she quieted, he spoke softly. "You're going to help me, Mara. We're going to stop him. But you need to rest first. Can you stand?" She nodded weakly. Noah slipped his arm under her shoulders, steadying her as she rose. She was lighter than he expected, fragile, half-starved. Rex stood beside them, vigilant, glancing back toward the darkness behind the crates as though expecting something to emerge. They made their way out of the alley, the flickering light behind them finally dying. As they reached the car, Noah looked down at the girl bundled in his jacket. "You did save her, Mara," he said quietly. "You just didn't know it yet." She closed her eyes, the faintest hint of relief breaking through the exhaustion. "Then maybe," she whispered, "there's still something left of me worth saving too." Noah didn't answer. He started the engine and drove toward the hill where the church clinic stood, Rex's eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, the darkness of the alley shrinking behind them like a wound that refused to close. The rain had returned to Clearwater, thin and cold, the kind that didn't pour so much as seep into the bones. Sergeant Noah Briggs stood before the old orphanage once more, now wrapped in yellow tape and guarded by the dull hum of generators. The faint strobe of police lights painted the wet walls blue and red, flickering like a warning heartbeat. The smell of mud, mildew, and rust mixed with diesel exhaust as a dozen officers combed through the grounds. Rex sat by Noah's side, calm but alert, his amber eyes reflecting the chaos around them. The German shepherd's fur was darker now from the rain, his tail still, his posture rigid. A soldier on duty again. Detective Harlan Keats, the man in charge of the search, strode toward Noah, his long coat flaring behind him. He was in his 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with salt and pepper hair slicked back and a deep groove between his brows that looked permanently carved. Years of chasing monsters had sanded the humor out of him, leaving only discipline and the faint smell of tobacco. His voice was gravel, roughened by both age and authority. "Briggs," he said, gesturing with his gloved hand, "you were right about this place. We've got half a dozen fake IDs, adoption papers with no agency stamps, and a ledger that smells like bleach." He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, unlit just to chew on it. "You sure you want to be down here when we start digging deeper?" "I've already been deeper," Noah said, adjusting his flashlight. "And I'm not leaving until we find what's underneath." They descended the narrow staircase that led to the cellar, a steep, winding thing carved into the earth beneath the church floor. The walls sweated moisture, the air heavy with mold and something older, darker. Rex went first, nose low, sniffing the air with purpose. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of Noah's light fell across the floor. Rusted bed frames, overturned chairs, chains bolted into concrete. Against one wall stood a row of iron cribs, their bars bent, their thin mattresses stained dark with age. The silence was thick, the kind that hummed with memory. Officer Dana Walsh, a young forensics tech barely in her late 20s, moved carefully through the space, snapping photos. Her ponytail was damp, and the freckles across her nose stood out starkly against her pale skin. She was good. Quiet, methodical, the kind of person who treated evidence like fragile truth. "These aren't new," she murmured. "But someone's been down here recently. The dust patterns don't match the rest of the floor." Noah scanned the walls. Religious graffiti covered every surface, phrases written in looping, uneven script, the ink smudged into black tears. "The Lord cleanses those who confess. Sin is born in the cradle." And in the center, carved deep into the concrete, "I baptize in the blood of innocence." Rex barked once, sharply, drawing all eyes to a far corner of the cellar where the foundation wall jutted unevenly. He pawed at the baseboard, nails clicking against something hollow. Noah crouched, prying away a loose plank. Behind it, wedged into the earth, was a small tin box, its surface rusted, its clasp sealed with grime. He forced it open carefully. Inside were folded papers, water-damaged but still legible. Adoption certificates, all with the same name in the clerical witness line, Reverend Caleb Dunn. Dana took the box gently, her gloved hands steady. "All forged," she said after a glance. "Dates don't match, signatures copied." Noah's flashlight swept further, landing on something half buried under a sheet of canvas. He pulled it back slowly and froze. A metal cradle, small, painted white once but now eaten through with rust, its frame welded into the floor. Inside lay the remnants of a torn blanket, and beside it, a small book. The leather cover was cracked, the title embossed faintly in gold, The Book of Renewal. He opened it. The pages were filled with scripture rewritten, distorted into sermons of guilt. One line repeated across multiple pages, scrawled like obsession. "I cleanse the souls born from sin. The flood is his mercy, and I am his hand." Noah's chest tightened. He didn't need to be told what that meant. Keats came up behind him, shining his light over the book. "Christ," the detective muttered. "He thought he was washing them clean." "Or washing them away," Noah said. Before he could say more, Rex began to growl again, low and steady, his head turned toward the back wall where the bricks looked newer, the mortar cleaner. Noah followed his line of sight and stepped closer. There, half hidden behind an old shelving unit, was a metal door, its handle crusted with rust, a padlock dangling uselessly beside it. He tried the handle. Locked. "Get me a crowbar," he said. When the door finally gave, the hinges screamed. The smell that came out was sharp, iron and rot. Inside the small room were file cabinets lined up neatly, their drawers half open, labels stripped away. He pulled one out, and a cascade of papers spilled to the floor. Birth certificates, dozens of them. Names smudged, birth dates crossed out, some pages half torn. Others had been wiped entirely clean, the ink erased with chemicals. Dana picked one up, holding it carefully under her light. "The records are real," she whispered, "but the names are gone. Someone wanted these kids to disappear, not just physically, but legally." Rex whimpered softly, then nosed at something under one of the cabinets. Noah knelt, reaching beneath the frame, and pulled out a small iron key, slick with rust and something darker. When he held it to the light, he saw a faint smear of dried blood along the teeth. He didn't need to guess who it belonged to. A shout came from upstairs. Boots pounded against the old floorboards, echoing down the stairwell. Keats turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. A young patrolman appeared at the bottom of the steps, breathless. "Detective, We've got Dunn. He came back." Noah rose, the key clenched tight in his hand. When they led the Reverend down moments later, he looked almost unchanged. Coat buttoned, hair neat, eyes as calm as ever. The damp air didn't seem to touch him. 2 officers flanked him, but he moved as if he were the one escorting them. "Reverend Caleb Dunn," Keats said coldly, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of child endangerment, unlawful adoption, and suspected homicide." Dunn smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching like a prayer half forgotten. "Homicide? Oh no, Detective. You misunderstand. I gave them salvation." Noah stepped forward, his voice flat. "You gave them fear." Dunn's eyes flicked toward him, then to Rex, who growled softly at his feet. "Fear," he said softly, "is the first step to purity." Noah held up the bloodied key. "And this? What does this unlock, Reverend?" Dunn's smile widened. "Forgiveness," he said. "Not yours. Theirs." As the officers dragged him up the stairs, his voice echoed behind him, calm and chilling. "No sin remains unwashed. Not even mine. The flood will come again, Sergeant. It always does." Noah stood in the silence that followed, staring at the cradle bolted into the floor, the hollow space where children's names had been erased. Rex pressed his head against Noah's knee, a quiet reminder that life, however fragile, still endured. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the church roof like 1,000 quiet questions that would never find their answers. The storm came back to Clearwater without warning, rolling in from the Gulf like a black tide. By nightfall, the streets had turned to silver ribbons beneath the rain, and the wind screamed through the church steeples as if the town itself were begging for mercy. In the police station, power flickered in erratic bursts, the emergency generators coughing like dying engines. Sergeant Noah Briggs stood by the radio console, soaked to the bone and furious. His reflection in the darkened window looked like a ghost, jaw tight, eyes burning beneath the fluorescent light. The message had arrived barely 20 minutes ago, handwritten on a torn page of the King James Bible found inside an abandoned transport van on Route 17. The van's back doors had been forced open, the 2 officers escorting Reverend Caleb Dunn found unconscious, one with a fractured skull, the other delirious from chloroform. On the seat where Dunn had sat lay the Bible, its pages soaked, but the ink clear enough to chill the room. "If I cannot have them, no one shall." Detective Harlan Keats was pacing across the office, his raincoat dripping onto the floor. His cigarette hung unlit between his fingers, the tip crushed flat. "He planned this," he said grimly. "No way a 60-year-old preacher outsmarts 2 armed escorts without help. Someone on the inside tipped him off." Noah didn't look up. "He's not 60, he muttered. "He's ageless, like mold." Keats stopped pacing, watching his partner's reflection in the window. "You think he'll come for the girl?" "He already said so." Noah's voice was low, strained. "If I can't have them, no one shall. He's not talking about the girls from the orphanage. He's talking about Mara and Lumen." Lightning split the sky outside, bleaching the room white for half a heartbeat before plunging it back into darkness. The radio crackled. Static. Then Dispatch's voice came through, thin and urgent. "Unit 3, power outage reported at Clearwater General. Backup generators failed to start. Pediatrics and maternity are in total dark. Units nearby, please respond." Noah's head snapped up. "Elena's there," he said. Keats cursed. "So's the baby." Noah was already moving. Rex barked once, sharp and loud, tail stiff as he bounded after his handler. Within seconds, they were in the cruiser, cutting through the storm, the siren wailing thinly under the pounding rain. Water lashed the windshield in sheets, and the road shimmered with runoff, every curve threatening to pull the tires loose. Lightning flashed over the town's outline, telephone poles bent, the church on the hill a flickering silhouette against the sky. At Clearwater General, the power was half dead. Only a few backup lights glowed weakly in the hallways, and the air smelled of antiseptic and panic. Nurses moved like ghosts in the dim corridors, their footsteps muffled by the storm's echo. Rex's nails clicked sharply against the tile as he led Noah toward the maternity wing. The dog's ears twitched, his entire body coiled with tension. Something about the silence ahead felt wrong. Not like fear, but like waiting. Inside room 203, Elena Ward was holding Lumen close to her chest. The nurse's usually composed face was pale and drawn, her dark hair plastered to her forehead. She looked up as Noah burst through the door, her voice trembling but steady. "The power's out. The generator failed. The security cameras keep glitching. I tried to call for help, but—" Her words cut off when she saw Rex. The dog had frozen mid-step, muscles rigid, head turned toward the hallway. A sound, barely audible, came from somewhere beyond the half-open door. It wasn't footsteps. It was something slower, deliberate. Noah's hand went to his weapon. "Lock the door," he said quietly. Elena's eyes darted to the baby in her arms. "What's happening?" "Stay behind me," he said. The lights flickered, then died completely, leaving only the intermittent flash of lightning through the window. For a few seconds, everything was colorless, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Rex growled low, deep in his throat. His eyes caught the lightning, two amber flames in the dark. From the corridor came the soft scrape of metal against tile. Then silence. Elena clutched Lumen tighter. "Noah." He held a finger to his lips, his ears strained for the sound again. Nothing. Then, faintly, a voice. Calm, familiar, reverent. "Sergeant Briggs." Noah's blood froze. "You took what wasn't yours," the voice continued, muffled through the door. "The child was never meant to stay among the unclean." Rex barked furiously, throwing himself against the door, teeth flashing. The sound that came back was laughter. Soft, steady, terrifying in its serenity. Noah positioned himself between the bed and the door. "Done," he said, voice cold. "It's over. You step through that door and I'll end this." "End?" Dunn's voice carried a strange calm, almost joy. "There is no end, only cleansing. The flood is mercy, Sergeant. You of all men should know. Water washes away everything." The emergency lights flickered on for a split second, revealing a shape outside the window at the far end of the corridor. A figure in a soaked coat, his hair plastered white against his skull. He moved slowly, deliberately, dragging something metallic in one hand. A crowbar. Noah's pulse spiked. He motioned for Elena to back towards the far corner. She obeyed, clutching Lumen tight against her chest, whispering to calm the infant who had begun to stir. The thunder outside rolled like a drumbeat. "Rex," Noah whispered, kneeling beside him. The shepherd's breath came fast, chest heaving. "Guard." Rex positioned himself directly before the door, crouched low, every hair raised. The hallway light flickered again, and for a moment, Noah caught sight of Dunn through the small window in the door. His face was pale, his eyes gleaming like steel marbles in the dark. The crowbar lifted slightly, then vanished as the light failed once more. Noah steadied his breath, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The silence stretched too long. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Then, glass shattered, not from the door, but from the window behind them. Elena screamed. Noah spun, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness to find a spray of shattered glass and wind tearing through the curtains. The open night stared back. Nothing but the storm. He turned again. The door stood ajar. The lock had been cut. "Stay put!" he shouted, stepping into the hallway. The emergency lights flickered once more, painting the walls in strobing red. The corridor was empty. No sign of Dunn. Only a single object on the floor, a page torn from the same Bible, plastered to the tile by rain. The ink smeared but legible. "The flood takes what was promised." Rex sniffed the page, growled, and lifted his gaze to the far stairwell door swinging lightly on its hinges. Noah felt his stomach turn. "He's not gone," he muttered. "He's hunting." From down the hall came the faintest echo of movement, soft, steady, receding into the hospital's lower floors. Noah holstered his weapon slowly. "We'll finish this," he whispered, his voice barely audible under the roar of thunder. He looked back at Elena and the sleeping baby in her arms. "Not tonight." Outside, the storm screamed louder, wind battering the windows like fists. Somewhere below, the security cameras blinked on and off, capturing only fragments of motion, a shadow moving through flooded corridors, a trail of water glistening behind it. And above it all, the faint, haunting sound of a man humming a hymn. The storm had not stopped. It had only changed its shape. By dawn, Clearwater was a drowned city, its streets turned into narrow rivers and its buildings glimmering in the haze like rusting tombstones. The sirens had long gone silent, drowned beneath the hiss of relentless rain. Sergeant Noah Briggs moved through knee-deep water, his breath visible in the cold air, his flashlight trembling with every heartbeat. Rex trotted beside him, soaked to the skin but unrelenting, his paws slapping against the current. The dog's fur clung to his frame, streaked with mud and blood from a shallow cut on his shoulder, yet his amber eyes burned with a focus that kept Noah moving. The scent trail was faint but purposeful, familiar. The Reverend had come this way. Detective Harlan Keats's voice crackled over the radio, barely audible through static. "Briggs, satellite picked up movement near the old shipping depot. Northeast Pier, Warehouse 3. Flood levels high. Don't go in alone." "I'm already there," Noah answered, pushing forward through the rain. He cut the radio off before Keats could argue. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated walls bowed inward, the roof sagging, windows shattered from years of salt and wind. It had been abandoned since the port closed, a skeleton left to rust by the river. But tonight, light flickered through its cracks. Dim, golden, wrong. Rex stopped at the base of the loading ramp, sniffing the air, then gave a low growl. Noah placed a steadying hand on his neck. "Easy," he whispered. "He's close." He drew his weapon, stepping through the half-open door. The smell hit first. Diesel, mold, and something faintly metallic. Candles lined the floor in uneven rows, their wax running into the water like pale tears. At the far end of the warehouse, beneath the collapsed crane structure, stood Reverend Caleb Dunn. He was barefoot, his priest's coat gone, replaced by a soaked white shirt clinging to his narrow frame. His silver hair was plastered against his skull, his face gaunt but strangely serene. In one hand, he held a revolver, in the other, a soaked Bible. His eyes gleamed in the candlelight, cold, ecstatic, unblinking. "Sergeant Briggs," he said softly, his voice carrying across the water like a hymn. "I knew you'd follow the flood. You always do." Noah moved closer, weapon raised. "It's over, Dunn. Drop the gun." Dunn smiled faintly. "Over?" He looked around as if the word itself was foreign. "No, Sergeant. Nothing ends. It's all rebirth. The water washes, the blood renews, and the child—" He stopped, tilting his head. "You took what was sacred. You gave her to the world. That is not mercy. That is corruption." Noah's grip tightened. "You talk about mercy, but all you've done is destroy. Those children trusted you." Dunn's laughter was soft, uneven. They were never mine to destroy. They were his to test. He lifted the revolver slowly, the barrel trembling but aimed directly at Noah. I am the instrument. You should understand. You were once a soldier, weren't you? You followed orders. So did I. Rex barked suddenly, breaking the silence, his voice echoing off the walls like thunder. Dunn flinched, his finger brushing the trigger. Don't! Noah shouted. But the sound of the shot came almost at the same instant. Everything happened in one motion. Rex lunged. The bullet tore through the air, hitting the dog mid-leap. The impact threw Rex sideways into the rising water. The sound of his body hitting the floor was heavier than the gunfire itself. No! Noah's voice ripped from his throat. He surged forward, tackling Dunn with a force that knocked both of them into the flood. The revolver skidded away, disappearing beneath the murky water. Dunn struggled, his strength surprising for a man his age, his fingers clawing at Noah's throat. You can't stop the cleansing, he hissed. You can't stop what's divine. Noah's fist connected with Dunn's jaw, the crack sharp and final. The Reverend went still, his eyes rolling back as the candles toppled, flames sputtering in the floodwater. Noah pulled himself up, chest heaving, and reached for his cuffs. With shaking hands, he snapped them around Dunn's wrists and dragged him toward a steel beam for support. The man groaned, blood running from his nose, but his eyes still burned with that terrible light. The flood takes what it's owed, he whispered. You'll see. Noah ignored him. He turned toward Rex. The shepherd was lying half-submerged near the base of the ramp, his fur matted, his breathing shallow but present. Noah stumbled to him, falling to his knees. Hey, stay with me, he murmured, his voice breaking. He lifted Rex's head gently, pressing his hand against the wound just above the shoulder. Blood clouded the water, mixing with the rain. The dog's eyes fluttered open, finding his handler's face. You did good, Noah whispered. You saved her. You saved all of us. Outside, the wind roared, shaking the warehouse until it moaned like a dying ship. The floodwater was rising fast, swirling around Noah's legs. He looked once more at Dunn. The man was laughing quietly to himself, head tilted towards the ceiling, as if listening to something only he could hear. Rex, Noah said, voice low, desperate. He wrapped his arms around the dog and lifted him, cradling the heavy body against his chest. The German shepherd's paw twitched, brushing weakly against his sleeve. Noah waded toward the exit, his boots slipping against the slick metal ramp. Behind him, lightning flashed, throwing Dunn's chained silhouette into sharp relief against the collapsing walls. By the time Noah reached the doorway, the water was at his knees. He stepped into the storm, the wind slapping his face, the rain cold and punishing. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Keats's team, finally closing in. But Noah couldn't hear them over the sound of his own heartbeat and the fading breaths of the dog in his arms. When he reached higher ground, he knelt in the mud, pressing his forehead to Rex's. You're still the bravest soul I've ever known, he whispered. You didn't just save her, you saved me. Rex's breathing slowed, steady, his eyes half closed but peaceful. The thunder rolled one last time across Clearwater, long and low, before the rain began to ease. In that moment the storm seemed to bow, as if even the heavens acknowledged what had been lost and what had been saved. Behind him, officers stormed the warehouse, their shouts drowned by the rush of water. Dunn was dragged out screaming scripture, his voice thin and fading against the wind. No sin remains unwashed. Noah didn't look back. He sat in the mud with Rex in his arms, the dog's head resting against his chest, the dawn just beginning to cut through the clouds. The first pale light glimmered on the flooded river, and for the first time in days, The sound of the rain was gentle. The storm broke at last, leaving behind a silence that felt almost holy. Clearwater woke beneath a pale sky, its streets rinsed clean of the mud and sin that had once buried it. The morning sun touched the broken rooftops like a gentle apology, glinting off puddles that mirrored the world upside down. The church bell, long silent, gave a single tired toll somewhere in the distance, less a call to prayer than a sigh of survival. Sergeant Noah Briggs stood on the hospital steps, his uniform still stained with dried blood and rain. His eyes were red from sleeplessness, but there was a steadiness in them again, the kind that comes only after a man has walked through hell and returned carrying something worth saving. Beside him sat Rex, wrapped in a clean bandage around his shoulder. The German shepherd's fur had been washed and brushed by the veterinary team, though the faint scar beneath his coat would always remain, a mark of loyalty paid in full. His tail thumped softly against the concrete as he watched nurses moving back and forth through the glass doors. He looked older now, calmer, as if he too understood the storm was finally over. Inside, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and morning coffee. Elena Ward walked down the corridor carrying baby Lumen in her arms, the child's tiny fingers curled around a lock of her dark hair. Elena's usual composure had softened into something more maternal. Her olive skin glowed faintly in the morning light, and the exhaustion under her eyes made her beauty seem human again. She paused when she saw Noah through the glass, smiling faintly before shifting the baby higher against her shoulder. The little girl, Lumen, was awake now, blinking at the brightness of the world she'd nearly never known. Her breath fogged the window as she pressed her palm to the glass, small and perfect. A voice called softly from down the hall. Mara Lee, thinner but stronger now, emerged from a patient room. The bruises had faded from her face, though faint shadows lingered like ghosts beneath her eyes. Her brown hair had been trimmed neatly to her shoulders, and she wore a hospital cardigan that hung loosely around her narrow frame. Yet there was something new in the way she carried herself. Shoulders straighter, chin higher, as if she'd decided she no longer needed to hide from sunlight. When she looked at Lumen, a tremor passed across her lips, a mixture of guilt, awe, and something deeper. Love, raw and unguarded. Noah stepped inside as the two women met halfway down the corridor. Elena smiled at him. "She's asking for you," she said, nodding toward Rex, who limped in carefully behind his handler. "They're calling him a hero. The papers already gave him a name. The Guardian of Lumen." Noah's smile was tired but real. He'd probably prefer bacon to titles. Elena chuckled softly. "He's earned both." Mara took a hesitant step forward, her eyes fixed on the dog. Rex's ears perked, up, and he padded toward her with the slow dignity of an old soldier. She crouched, reaching out a trembling hand. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "You saved her. You saved us all." Rex pressed his head into her palm, eyes half closed, tail swishing faintly. Mara's voice cracked as she whispered, "I didn't deserve that." Noah knelt beside her. "No one deserves miracles, Mara," he said gently. "That's what makes them miracles." The three stood in silence for a while. The woman who had lost everything, the nurse who had stitched the pieces back together, and the man who refused to stop searching even when the world told him to. Lumen stirred, letting out a small coo, and Elena smiled. "She's hungry," she said softly, "and I think she knows who her mother is." Tears filled Mara's eyes, but she didn't look away. She took Lumen into her arms for the first time without trembling. The baby nestled easily against her, one hand brushing the silver cross that still hung around Mara's neck. Elena watched them with quiet pride, then turned to Noah. "You did what none of us could," she said. Noah shook his head. "No. Rex did. He believed when I didn't." The morning moved slowly after that. By noon, the skies cleared entirely, and the water began to drain from the streets. Keats arrived with the final report. Dunn had been transferred under heavy guard, still muttering prayers about the flood. The detective looked exhausted but satisfied. His salt and pepper hair was plastered to his forehead, his trench coat still damp from the field. He handed Noah a folder. "Everything's tied up," he said. "The orphanage records, the adoption fraud, it's all going to the state. You did good, Briggs." Noah flipped the file shut without reading it. "It's not about doing good, Harlan. It's about making sure the dead don't get the last word." Keats grunted softly, lighting a cigarette despite the hospital's no-smoking signs. "Yeah, maybe that's the same thing." He gave Rex a small nod. "Hell of a dog you've got." Noah smiled faintly. "He's more than that." Weeks later, Clearwater began to rebuild. The streets dried, the mud cracked, and the townspeople started repainting their doors instead of boarding them shut. A month after the flood, Mara Lee moved into a small cottage by the lake, the same one the town once used for ferry keepers. It was a modest place. 2 rooms, a white fence, and a small garden where lilies grew in the damp earth. Elena helped her settle in, bringing blankets and jars of preserves, while Noah carried in the crib that had once sat in the church clinic. Lumen slept soundly inside it, a faint smile curling her lips. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Rex would sit by the porch steps, his ears twitching at the laughter drifting from inside the house. Mara would often step outside with Lumen in her arms, her hair catching the gold of the sunset. "You hear that, Rex?" she'd whisper. "That's what peace sounds like." The dog would tilt his head, tail sweeping the porch in slow, contented arcs. Sometimes, from the road, Noah would watch them quietly through his truck window. Elena's car parked nearby, the cottage glowing in the warm light, the world finally at rest. He'd lift his coffee cup in a silent toast before driving on, the reflection of the lake shimmering in his mirrors. The flood had taken much, but it had left behind something pure, a reminder carved in the shape of loyalty and love. As twilight settled over Clearwater, Noah parked by the ridge overlooking the town. The air was clean now, the scent of rain replaced by pine and soil. Rex sat beside him, heeled, his fur glinting under the soft dusk. Noah reached over, scratching behind the dog's ear. "We did it, buddy," he murmured. "You kept them safe." Rex turned his head slightly, meeting his handler's eyes. In the distance, a child's laughter echoed from the cottage near the lake, mingling with the faint barking of a dog that sounded almost like joy. Noah smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miracles don't need wings," he said. "Sometimes they just need a bark in the storm." The last light of day shimmered on the water, and for the first time since the flood, Clearwater truly lived up to its name. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in bursts of light or the sound of trumpets. Sometimes they crawl out of the flood, muddy, shivering, but alive. In Clearwater, that miracle had fur, 4 paws, and a heart that refused to give up. Rex didn't just save a child. He reminded us that faith isn't found in churches or sermons. It's found in the moments we choose love over fear, courage over silence, and compassion over judgment. Maybe God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them with wagging tails, muddy paws, and a bark loud enough to wake a sleeping soul. And if you're watching this right now, perhaps you too have walked through your own storm. Maybe your flood was grief, loneliness, or loss. But know this: the waters will clear. And when they do, you'll see that every act of kindness, every small moment of love, was a miracle you were creating all along. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to believe again. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us all that God still moves through this world, often in the shape of a loyal friend. May God bless you, keep you safe through every storm, and may your heart always find its way back to the light.